I think so often when you look at a herd of horses, nobody's out for themselves. You don't see a horse go, well, I found my way to the water hole. It doesn't matter if the rest of you can. Or I'm going to eat all the grass in this pasture and none of you are going to have any more. It is sort of like whatever happens to us, it's for the common good. And in a way, I think predation, our predatory ways are finally coming home to roost. We are running out of planet. We're running out of resources. We're running out of food. And the reason, because we keep thinking, if I just take more, I'll be okay. And the answer is that doesn't work.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Purple Stars podcast. I'm Sarah, your host, and I'm beyond thrilled about today's guest. He's a neurosurgeon, decorated Army veteran, holds 4 professorships. He has also worked as the senior medical consultant for the TV show Grey's Anatomy, has published multiple books, and is a world-renowned horse whisperer. I think after this short intro, you probably already can guess why I am so excited. Please welcome Dr. Allan Hamilton.
Well, hi, Sarah. Nice to be with you.
Thank you so much for being on our show. When I read your biography, I was blown away, and I think everyone is blown away. And I am so fascinated, not just about everything you've achieved and you have done, but particularly about how you have bridged the gap between the scientific world and also the, for some people, seemingly opposite realms of intuition and spirituality. And I would love to know, could you share with us more about the journey and also how you have started to incorporate intuition and spirituality into your medical work?
Well, that's the hour right there. One of the things that I was just talking with somebody on the admissions committee about is that we tend to get people in medicine from 2 arms. One is the straightforward STEM, science, technology, engineering, math angle, the science angle. But to me, the more interesting ones are the ones that are coming from the non-science, which are coming from the humanities. And that's sort of where I was coming from. So I tend to think a lot in pictures. I wanted once upon a time to be an artist. I wasn't good enough to really make a living at it. And then so I became I went an English major, an education major. And then I sort of wanted to try and get a job, but we were in the middle of a recession, so I couldn't get one. And I got a job as a janitor. And it turned out the job as the janitor, amongst other things, involved cleaning up in a veterinary hospital, which is not a lot of fun. But in the veterinary hospital, I could see the surgery going on through the door. So I guess I was mopping just a little too much right outside the door. And one of the surgeons took pity on me and said, hey, if you get your chores done early, you can come in and hold retractors for me. And that was it. I was hooked on that. But I always approached medicine from the angle of the right brain, not the left brain. And that is, I see everything in pictures, which is, and I love working with my hands. And so to me, neurosurgery was great because first off, it's all in pictures. It's just CT scans and MRI scans and seeing things in 3 dimensions, which I'm really good at. And it's wonderful, intimate work with your hands at the most intimate level. So it was just perfect. I had one of the people who interviewed me for neurosurgery was a guy named Bob Ogeman, and he was a very famous tumor surgeon. I was petrified when I saw his name on the interview list, and I went in to see him. He was the last person I was going to interview with, and he was sitting at the desk, and it was dark. I could see the light on his desk, but I could see it was my application he was looking at because I could see my photograph reflected in his glasses. So I sat down. He didn't even look at me. He just sort of waved me in, sit down. So, and he had this funny way of talking, which I loved. I still hear his voice in my head, but he sort of whined just a little bit, So the first question out of his mouth was, he goes, well, what kind of hobbies do you have? And I said, well, Dr. Urchin, I'm a medical student. We don't have any hobbies. He goes, oh, maybe like when you were a kid. And I said, well, when I was a kid, I loved making model ships, tall ships with little cannons and all the little blocks and tackle. And he looks at me, he's big smile, and he goes, so did I. And the thing he was interested in was what were the things that really made me happy. And that had to do, a lot of it had to do with just working with your hands and your eyes and your brain and just being intensely focused in this flow state. And that's really where the connection for me comes in neurosurgery, is it was very easy for me to find this flow state where everything telescoped down into what I was doing. And it was in a very gratifying life. And I knew, I was working in a field that was cutting edge. I knew nobody was going to solve all of the problems and put me out of work. I made my reputation really in computer guidance systems in neurosurgery and seeing things in 3 dimensions and doing heads-up displays and that sort of thing. So it all sort of fits. It doesn't sound like it fits. It sort of sounds a little bit like a ping pong ball bouncing around, but it does fit. At least in my mind, it fits. And so I've always said that there's 2 things that everybody should know how to do if they want to get ahead. And one is write, and the other is be able to speak. Because most people are petrified of talking in front of people. And we all are. I mean, public speaking is one of the most anxiety-producing things you can do. But if you learn that there's skill sets with it, and you learn how to do it, and you get effective at convincing people, that's one powerful talent. And the other one for me is writing, and I love writing. I was very fortunate that Rod Serling, who is the guy who invented the Twilight Zone, happened to be, when I was a teenager, my creative writing teacher. And so I studied creative writing with him for 2 years. And he insisted I take Shakespeare at the same time, which was, it wasn't my choice, but he made me. So I did 4 semesters of Shakespeare and 4 semesters with Mr. Serling. And it was wonderful. And that those are the 2 main strengths I brought, besides thinking in pictures.
I find it very interesting you said that it's like a ping pong, because
Yeah.
the second you said, I actually was thinking, wow, he has such a red line. Everything connects to dots. Like, I think I wouldn't even say it's a zigzag. I think that your journey is a great example how everything prepares us for the next chapter. And there comes then a point when everything falls into place. And is that maybe where you feel that your spirituality comes in place, that you are aligned with things? Or how did your spirituality start?
Well, first off, when I was a kid, I was brought up in a fairly religious home. I was an altar boy and all that. But that never really convinced me at all about spirituality, because religion and spirituality are 2 very different things. But I think one of the things that convinced me was that there's an awful lot to us. And when you look at the brain, there's an awful lot that you sort of say to yourself, well, why are we so aware? What's the point of all of this? And you could argue that it's got no point at all, and it's what I call bet on black. You're a finite mortal being, and you die, and the universe comes to an end, and that's it. Okay? Or you could bet on red for roulette, and you could bet on red, and red says, I look out at things, and it looks to me like there's some kind of plan, there's some kind of force out there that's making things happen for a reason that I can't fathom, but making things happen. And things seem orderly, the planets and the life forces on the planet. And there's, definitely something about this planet that loves life in every permutation possible. So you can say, hey, wait a minute, well, I'll bet on red. Now, if I'm wrong, I still end up on black. But if I'm right, I've lived my life a little bit differently. And for me, that little bit of difference is that it doesn't make sense to me not to be spiritual. Mm-hmm. In other words, I look at everything my patients were going through. I look at the lessons that I've learned from them as they faced, life-threatening crises, and I watch them assemble all of their force and power emotionally and spiritually. And so, I said, so what is, what is spirituality? Well, in a way, it's very simple. It's you have the feeling that you're part of something bigger than yourself. Okay? And that could be your family, that could be God, it could be nature, it could be anything you want. But just the feeling I'm not alone, I'm not an individual life unit, and that's the totality of everything out there. And I look at this world and say, I don't think it could just be random. Yes, there might be random forces and rules and reactions in play. I get that. But you look out at the universe and you go, boy, there's some powerful force, creative force behind it. In fact, I could argue that maybe the reason we evolve intelligence is so that we can appreciate creation. And it sort of makes sense to me that if there was a creative force behind all of this, it goes, well, I don't want to waste it. I'd like for somebody to appreciate everything that's gone into this, 14.5 billion year experiment of mine. And it was no small trick to bring time and space out of nothing in the Big Bang, so give me a break. So I look at that and say, it looks to me like there's more to life. If there isn't, I'll be disappointed and I'll write in on a postcard. But I do think looking at the brain and knowing how the brain works and knowing that it's capable of so much more than we typically or normally think of. And I go, it's the linkage to something bigger than ourselves. It really is. And so to me, it sort of evolved out of that, and it evolved out of my working with horses. The two of them sort of came together as, I know, the creator sent horses around so I'd wake up a little bit, so I'd hear things that the universe was speaking to me. And sure enough, with horses, that's sort of where I really feel the most spiritual when I'm working with horses. Although there are times when I was doing brain surgery, I really felt like, I had God riding on my right shoulder guiding me and that sort of thing.
I have so many follow-up questions now. Maybe we start off with your book that's coming out next year. And can we talk about the neuroscience of spirituality? Because I love that with your background, your medical background, that you say there is something bigger than ourselves. And also I loved how you mentioned when it comes to how you're patient in the face of the most challenging chapters of your life probably came up with this power. Or also the way you described during some surgeries, you felt the divine presence. So I'm wondering, could we touch upon a little bit about like the neuroscience of spirituality?
So, it's interesting that when we look at the very, very first beginnings of human civilization, the very first things we find are places of worship. And these are not just benign little buildings. These are massive undertakings in the middle of nowhere, thousands and thousands of people who had to haul these gigantic rocks and construction materials. And you go, that's a huge amount of work, a huge amount of resources, a huge amount of assets. And you go, okay, so maybe if I was in a civilization that wasn't spending its time working out religion and spirituality, maybe we'd come out in front because we've saved all this money and all this labor and all this other stuff. Well, the thing is, we've never found a civilization that didn't have religion and spirituality. We've never found one that didn't have a mythological strain running through it. So there must be something that we need, that we have to have. And it's yes, a simple explanation would be, well, the world's a scary place and having a spiritual mythology will help you to, handle the next total solar eclipse. Okay. I think it's more than that. I think it's this sort of tendency to want to connect to the forces of nature that we see, the forces of nature that we don't see, things that we can't, that we're in awe of. And I think awe is a great way to look at spirituality, because we if you drive down the highway and you see these scenic pull-offs and people pull their cars over there and start taking pictures, and you go, well, why are they doing that? And they go, because there's something beautiful about seeing an entire landscape and looking out over it and embracing it. And the same thing with looking at mountains or looking at the ocean. And I think that we all have this sense of we're at risk for losing it, but this sense of being embedded in nature. And the more embedded in nature we are, the better off we are. So there are certain aspects of brain function that seem to tell us a little bit about spirituality. The first is, I defy you to come up with a spiritual ritual that is not right brain oriented. Okay, so our left brain, because we became so invested in language, we had to specialize. So we made our left hemisphere our dominant hemisphere, and it's almost always working. 99.9% of the time, it's the left hemisphere that's working. But it comes with a price, okay, and that's it. It's sort of obsessed with itself. It's sort of, it's the me, it's the I inside of each one of us, and we hear it constantly. So the language that we use becomes sort of the pattern of what our brain uses for thought. So if I say to you, you don't have to answer, but if I say to you, I just want you to think the answer. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream? Okay. So if you said chocolate, which is the correct answer, okay, I'm just teasing. If whatever flavor it is, what flavor was it?
Actually, vanilla and chocolate.
Okay, all right. So when you think that, you hear chocolate, or you hear vanilla, or strawberry, whatever it is. Your thought is that word. So we can do an experiment to prove it. We can ask, well, if I was born congenitally deaf, and I never heard the word chocolate, and my whole life, all I did was American Sign Language, and you asked me, you held up a piece of paper and said, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? Mm-hmm. The thought would occur to me in American Sign Language. So the language that we use becomes the very thought pattern that we have. And it's obsessive. It's constantly obsessed with itself. Antonio Damasio calls it the autobiographical self. It's completely self-absorbed, and it's always about, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm doing, that's what's going on in the rest of the world, but I'm inside here, this is my identity, that's what matters. So then you have the right hemisphere, which doesn't have a voice, and so it's constantly drowned out by the left hemisphere. But the right hemisphere has a couple of unique gifts. First, it's where we draw. It's where imagery occurs to us. It's very lyrical, and it wants to link up. It wants to commune with other things. It's not isolated the way the left hemisphere is. So if you think about, we chant, or we drum, or we dance into a frenzy, or we, you name it, whatever whether, if you think about the Tibetans who use the colored sand and make these incredible patterns, or playing circular bowls, any of these things, they all are right brain activities. And why? Because you got to get the left hemisphere to shut up if you want to be spiritual. You can't connect with the left hemisphere. It just will not let you. It's obsessed with itself. So you have all these right brain activities which disconnect you. And they basically tell the left hemisphere, would you just shut up for a minute while I'm chanting, or while I'm meditating, or whatever I'm doing right now. But just shut up so I can have a moment. And then you have this moment of just nothing going on, And when you first are taught meditation, they tell you, yes, your mind will drift away. Just bring yourself back to your breathing. And why? Because that's your left hemisphere saying, no, I want to get in. I want to get in on this. And you go, no, we're just going to concentrate on our breathing again. And you push it away. So the right hemisphere is what allows us to commune and join things that are bigger than us, whether it be nature, whether it be this sense of intimacy with other people, with other life forms. And I think some cultures do it better than others. I was just writing about a friend of mine who was a Native American poet, and his name was Elwood Pipestem. And Elwood was out at my ranch for a while, and he stayed out there. And he wrote a poem about a hawk, and he was reading it to me. And as we were walking, I said, Elwood, you're not going to believe this, but there's a hawk right overhead right now. And he said, well, of course there is. I wrote him a poem, a beautiful poem about it. And I thought, why do I not get this? But, to Elwood, it made perfect sense that he was in touch with all of these things around him, and the things around him responded. And there was that, I think, communication that we're very much at risk for losing by getting farther and farther away from nature. I even wrote in the book about something called nature deficit syndrome. And, I think we are really at risk for raising our kids in nature deficit syndrome. They don't get out of the city. They don't get to beautiful wild places anymore. It's just, and so part of that is when we have that experience of communion with bigger forces than ourselves, we start to have a sense of comfort and spiritual comfort. So I think that's a big part of why we have this innate sense of spirituality. There are other brain functions that come into it. The whole thing, we're all arguing about what is awareness and what does it mean, the theory of the mind, what does it mean to understand things. Enrico Fermi was a very famous physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project, amongst other things. And there's something called Fermi's paradox, which always has fascinated me. And Fermi's paradox is, he said, I look out at the universe, there's billions and billions of stars and billions of planets, and the odds of there being intelligent life somewhere else in the universe are overwhelmingly large, okay? But we have never encountered intelligent life. So he said, so I can only come to two conclusions. The first is they very much don't want to be found, and they're hiding very well from us. Or the second is intelligent life always destroys itself. And that's why we don't find it. So I would like to think there's a third possibility, which is intelligent life eventually comes to an understanding of what creation means and the responsibility that creation endows us with. And that to me is you can find that very easily. When I talk to people from, First Nations and indigenous peoples, I'm always so surprised at how embedded they feel in their landscape and in nature, and how not embedded we feel. And I think for me, being around horses was my opportunity to really have a bridge through to another life form and really understand their connection, and they're teaching me about connections, about how to connect with them and not think, just do, just feel. Mm-hmm. And so there are parts of the brain that really appeal to that notion.
I find it very interesting how you explained, we rather than doing, feeling, and that mm-hmm. also a lot of people, and I personally think it's not just people living in bigger cities, but in general, the fast-paced life draws people into this fast-paced spiral where they do, run, and we can only feel, whether it's what we feel within us or the magical spirituality around us, when we pause, when we walk slowly. And that's why I also really love that you brought up the horses, because I read one of your books. It's called Lead with Your Heart, Lessons from a Life with Horses. And I actually would love to share how this book found me because it's very perfect when it comes to spirituality. So I moved to Santa Monica, and the first weekend I was just walking around, getting to know the neighborhood, and I found this little spiritual store. They had all sorts of things, and outside they had a bookshelf with secondhand books. Well, I would actually say the book that I got is more fourth hand because some pages were stuck together. And it's like, but I thought, okay, like I really like this book. And I thought it has character, doesn't matter if it's like not so new. And I had it on my desk ever since. And I'm reading regularly in it. By then, I still didn't know who you are. And I was listening to this podcast a few months later, and they shared about you being a neurosurgeon and everything. And I thought, wow, this guy sounds amazing. And I wrote your name down in my notes, and I thought I'll check out later. You probably could be a great guest. And then I was like, okay, I Googled you and I thought, wow, you're like, sounds amazing. But we had so many guests at that time. I thought I will reach out later. And then during some Zoom meeting, I'm sitting there on my desk and I look left and I saw the back of the book and I see your name. I'm like, Hamilton? Sounds so familiar to me. And then like I connected. I was like, wow, this is the person. Okay, and that day I sent you an email because I was like, okay, all the signs from the universe say, please get Dr. Allan Hamilton for the show.
The universe answers us when we put things out there.
Oh yeah.
I sometimes talk about intention and with horses a lot, and I go, when your intention as a trainer is shaped so that you can see what you want and you see the end in sight, you see how it's going to look, then your intention starts to shape the horse. It makes it much easier for the horse because it's sort of almost like the horse picks up that energy and takes on the collection and as if it's jumping, it's got the momentum going and then the energy collecting right before it releases in the jump and that sort of thing. And I think we do, if we put things out into the universe, and we very often the universe will assemble itself around that need or request or drive, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's so interesting that Albert Einstein said that coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous. So I think we tend to write things off. Yes, it's a coincidence. Yes, this happened. Yes, that happened. Well, and it could also be the universe is up to its usual tricks, trying to make things work out.
Yeah, but I definitely believe like getting you on the show was a universal connection because when I sent the first email, like I got a generic email address on your website, info something, I didn't get a response. So I was like, okay, let me pray. Maybe there's another way I can connect with him. So, and then I found another email address.
There's another email.
So yeah, exactly. There's always another email. And I think that's another thing. What I think spirituality comes in, it's not just that things fall into place, but we also need to put in the work, but they guide us. And that's what for me was the guidance. And I have a few questions about the book. One is, how have horses influenced your concept of leadership, both in the personal and the professional life?
So, the thing about horses and leadership is, first off, the leader in the herd always puts herself at risk. When the herd encounters something that might be dangerous or might be a threat, you will see the horses all organize themselves so that the lead mare is in the front, the one with the most experience and the most wisdom, but right behind her, the most senior horses in the herd. And then way back at the end are the most junior horses, the ones with the least experience, the ones who are the most likely to not know how to respond. And so I always say that, it's leadership is sort of about communication, but it's also about compassion. It's a sort of concern And I think so often when you look at a herd of horses, nobody's out for themselves. You don't see a horse go, well, I found my way to the water hole. It doesn't matter if the rest of you can. Or I'm going to eat all the grass in this pasture and none of you are going to have any more. It is sort of like whatever happens to us, it's for the common good. And in a way, I think predation, our predatory ways are finally coming home to roost. We are running out of planet. We're running out of resources. We're running out of food. And the reason, because we keep thinking, if I just take more, I'll be okay. And the answer is that doesn't work. So the herd mentality is really one of I step in front and take the risk. And I always tell my residents, and if ever your team does something wrong, you step in front and take the bullet. So if something happened, you step out and say, that's my fault. Now, I said, everybody will know it's not your fault, but everybody will be happy to see you stepping up and taking responsibility for what happened under your command. And I think that's one of the ways that's something that I really learned from horses. The second thing is that horses are about power. They're powerful animals, but they're not about using it for manipulation. They are really more about saying, can I partner up my power with your power? Our power is intellectual. Our power is mental. Their power is physical. But it makes a very strange set of bedfellows. We're the uber predator of the planet, and we're teaming up with one of the absolute prototypic prey animals. And in a way, it's when we learn to give up the prey animal that the horse begins to say, okay, I can partner with you. And so, if my horse spooks on a trail because it sees something that frightens it, I move that horse back out of range. And then as I'm circling around it, I'm always putting myself between it and the horse. I'm always letting the horse see that my leg is protecting you. I'm backing out away from it. If I'm training a horse that go through puddles, the horse sees me go through the puddle first. Okay, so that the horse says, okay, well, if the predator's willing to do it, and then I'll say, well, and the other thing is, I go as fast as they want. I can go as fast as they can handle it, as opposed to having an agenda, and that liberates me. So one of the things that you need to give up as a leader is your agenda can't necessarily be the agenda of everybody who works for you. That's a dictatorship. You want everybody to have their own dream and their own goals and their own sense of fulfillment, and that's what keeps people working with you, is they feel like they can be fulfilled. I remember, I won't use any names because of the podcast, but I worked for a guy who was very incredibly intelligent, bright man. But we had a number of neurosurgeons who worked for him who were very, very famous. So people would come to that hospital and say, oh, I'm here to see Dr. So-and-so. And, who's the chairman? And you'd go, no, he's not the chairman. Oh, I'm here to see Dr. this, and he's the chairman. No, he's not the chairman. So one day I asked him, I said, don't you get a little tired that everybody comes to this hospital looking for somebody else as the chairman? And he said, no, I take credit that I've let each one of them believe they're king in their own kingdom. Mm-hmm. And that's why they are looked upon. That's why people come to them looking for a king. And I thought, that's a pretty savvy guy, who I let everybody feel like they're a king or queen in their own kingdom. I think is a great philosophy. So, a lot of things with horses I learned the hard way. Surgeons are hard chargers at first. Good surgeons slow down. Good surgeons eventually learn that they're not God and they're not perfect. The only thing that they can try and do is be as careful and as thorough and compulsive as possible. There's a joke about neurosurgery being a question of belt, suspenders, and thumbtacks. You really want a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, and you want them all to be laid out for you. But part of that is also realizing you can't control everything. You can't control how the tumor is going to come out. You can't control the dissection of it all. But you sure as hell want it to go your way. You sure as hell say, if you could give me a break on the dissection, I'd be very appreciative. And so would my patient. I think when we're in tough circumstances in the middle of surgery, I always stop for a moment and just ask for guidance to do the absolute best thing for my patient, that make sure I make the right decisions. So I think horses teach you that you're not going to survive as alone. A horse alone is a dead horse. So you're not going to survive alone, and you're going to be much stronger as a herd. And we're entering the age of the herd. We have to start thinking about this planet as one herd, and all of the life forms that are on it are we need to reckon with all of them. I was watching a program about buffalo. I used to raise buffalo, so I was interested. And they were talking about tribes that had used monies that they'd gotten from oil or from casinos or other enterprises, and what were they doing with it? They're buying land back, and they're leaving it wild. And they kept insisting that, if the buffalo comes back, then the land will rejoice, and it'll be whole again. And sure enough, they found that when buffalo came back, so did thousands of other species, because all of a sudden there were holes being made in the earth for water to come in. And these were canals that animals could use to burrow, and different grasses took place. And, they were interviewing one of the gentleman who was involved in bringing these wildlands back, and he said something about, I don't make this decision because it's good for me, and I don't make it because it's good for my kids or my grandkids. I make it because it's good for 7 generations from now. And I think that's 7 generations. That's generations we'll never know. But the idea that we're doing good for generations we will never know sort of puts a huge bar, very high bar in front of us, that the decisions we make can't just benefit us, and they can't just benefit our own families. They have to benefit 7 generations from now. And I think that is really a herd mentality. That really is where the herd's coming from.
How do you think we can move as a society from the me mentality to the herd mentality?
Well, it's interesting. They asked me to write an introduction to a second edition of Lead with Your Heart. And I said, I'd like to write a different book. And they said, well, why? And I said, because I think the problems that were there in 2015 are very different now. And I think the problems that we have now are more dire. And I think I see a lot of younger people really sort of saying, despairing of, how do I tackle this? How do I tackle these existential threats that you've left me with? If it's not atomic bombs, it's going to be, pandemics. If it's not pandemics, it's going to be pollution. If it's not pollution, it's going to be global warming. It's just sort of like, so what's the answer? And I said, I think it's at a deeper level still with horses, though, which is you have to really embrace this idea that you cannot look to the simple, my generation, let me just diverge for a second. My generation, we thought we had it all. We thought, in the 60s, 70s, we were protesting Vietnam. We were the love generation. We had all this great music. We thought we were going to change the world. And what happened? Well, the world changed us. And all of a sudden, we were now interested more in our investment accounts and our second homes and our jet airplanes and all the rest of this crap. And we've now become the most disappointing generation in history. Far more disappointing than the generation of my dad, my grandfather, where they came out of World War II. And I think for the younger generation, millennials, and I think that they look at us and they go, "You've left us with a mess," and where and how do we start cleaning it up? And the answer is, you break with the predatory practices that we've had. You have to break with those predatory practices. And that means you embrace a society that gives everybody a chance. That means that you embrace a society where the ability for my children to have a better life than I have is there. That my kids can get ahead with education, that they can get ahead with housing, that they can live a better life, but also that the quality of that life is worth living. And I think in so many ways we spend all of our time, thinking about the Elon Musks of the world and the Donald Trumps of the world, and what billionaires they are, and this, that, and the other thing. And you go, they're the worst predators we have. Don't look at them. Don't look at them. Don't even gaze at them anymore. We need to be looking at the people who understand the herd. And by the herd, I mean understand the entirety of society. If you look at income disparity, as income disparity grows, so does every other marker of society's well-being deteriorate. Crime, dropouts from high school, unwanted pregnancies, suicide, drug addiction, illiteracy. You look at all of them, they all go up as income disparity goes up. Where's income disparity the least? In Scandinavia. So if you want to go live the American dream, go to Denmark. But the point is, you can go to school in Norway, you can go all the way through your PhD, your doctorate, and the only thing you need to pay for are the books that you reuse, your books, your textbooks. Everything else is free. Why? Because they took the funds that they got from North Sea exploration and they invested them. They have 4 generations worth of money. And so again, it's that attitude of, it's not me. It's not what can I get right now. It's how do I benefit generations beyond me? And guess what? When that happens, my kids' lives get better, my grandkids' lives get better, your life gets better, everybody's life gets better. And so I think that that's really where I want to head with this next book a little bit, is sort of tackle more of the existential threats and reassure people that the answers are still the same. They're always thinking about the herd, but maybe thinking about the herd harder and thinking about the herd more inclusively than we ever used to. When I look at some of the scenes of along our border, and believe me, in Arizona, I understand I have a lot of friends who are ranchers who have places along the border and have hundreds and hundreds of people trespassing through there and destroying them and all of that. I get that. But I can't get over a mother and 2 kids drowning in the Rio Grande with concertina wire either. I have to find a way that I can handle both of those. And ambivalence, we normally don't like ambivalence. But ambivalence is a very good state of mind, to be able to say, I can embrace both positions at once. I can understand why somebody wants a solid border wall and wants very good protection at the border. But I can also understand that, of course, we want immigration. Immigration is the great strength of this country. Immigration is how you're going to solve your tax problems. It's how you're going to solve your Social Security and your Medicare and all the things that are running out of money, is bringing in new people who are going to have jobs and pay taxes. And so you have to be able to say, okay, they're ambivalent positions, but I can embrace both of them. And I think that, again, comes from predators are single-minded. They pursue one goal. We always like people who are very ambitious and, driven, and, nothing gets in their way. And, that's not a very good life. I can tell you, since neurosurgery is a very self-involved life, it took me a long time to figure out that I had to give up certain things about it to find my life again with my family. I had a situation with my oldest son when he was about 7 or 8 years old, and I was crossing in the kitchen with him, and I was going to the garage and he was going to the school bus. And I gave him a kiss goodbye, and he suddenly said, I wish I had a brain tumor, Dad. And I go, what? Why would you say such a thing? And he said, because if I had a brain tumor, you'd have to see me every day. And I thought, oh boy, have I ever screwed up? I gotta go back and make all of this up. And I tried very hard to. I tried to teach my kids a little bit from what I had learned as a neurosurgeon, but it also meant giving up some things and learning that you needed to be there for them. So the end of that story is the same son, when he got his learner's permit, took out our Ford Expedition SUV out for a drive and forgot to open up the garage door and just blasted the whole garage to pieces. And then when he saw what he did, he slammed it in reverse and slammed it into the back wall. So I got home and it looked like a bomb had gone off in my house. And I figured out pretty quickly what was going on when I could see the car and everything. And my son comes running out and he goes, Dad, just relax. It's not a brain tumor. I go, and I said, how dare you use my life lessons against me like this? But, it was a good life lesson to hear, you have to, it's not a brain tumor.
Allan, what has helped you from being very focused on your career as a brain surgeon to still being focused, but opening and making also more space for connection?
Well, I think getting a little older and more mature helped. When I was young, I was a machine. I was relentless. I was as much of a predator as you could possibly be. I wanted to operate as much as possible, to get as many patients as possible. That isn't the answer. That just wasn't the answer. I broke my back. I got bucked off a rank Mustang and I broke my back, and I thought I might never get back to surgery again. And it made me understand that I appreciated it, but it wasn't who I was. That I was a lot more than just being a surgeon. We always go, when you're on a plane with somebody, they go, well, what do you do? And, and that's always, the answer is always, well, here's what I do for a living. But you could say, what did I do? You go, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a friend, I'm a this, I'm a that. But we always defer to our identity in work. And I think you learn as you get older, you learn as you see your patients. I've seen a lot of patients die. I've never met one of them who ever turned to me and said, I wish I had spent more time at work. So you learn, I guess, the hard way. You learn the hard way that, hey, that's not where the answer lies. And the other thing is, it's not where your legacy lies. Your legacy lies with the people that you love and that love you. That's the only legacy that endures. This business of, I have a legacy. I go, oh, for God's sakes, they just dig a hole in the ground and they shovel dirt on your face, and then they go to lunch and they go, oh, is that his sandwich? Because he's not going to eat it. Can I have it? And I go, that's your legacy. But it's all over. So remember that your legacy is with the people that you love and that love you, no one else.
Allan, you said earlier that you've learned a lot from your patients. I'm wondering, what have you learned from them, particularly when it comes to hope, and also the power hope can have in the process of healing and health?
So I think the first thing is that hope is an absolute necessity for survival. When people lose hope, and we know this from people who've been in survival situations in concentration camps, in prison, etc. When people lose hope, they die. And the mythology, the Greek mythology, is that Pandora got the box with all of the evils and sins of the world in it, and she was told never to open it, but she opened it anyway, and then she, and all of them escaped out into the world, and then she slammed it shut. But then she realized there was one thing left, and she looked in, and it was hope that then was the last to escape. So the evils of humanity are also buffered by hope. I think we forget what a necessity it is. I've seen situations with my patients early on where, you know, they would ask me, you know, tell me when the end is coming and that sort of thing. And, you know, I would try to be very honest and fulfill that commitment. And it took me a long time before I realized they'll know when the end is coming and they'll tell me, and I'll tell them I'll be there for you. But taking away people's hope is a terrible, terrible mistake. And you know, you always see, for example, when I talk in front of groups of doctors, I go, well, how many of you have had a patient where you know they've had a terrible disease and they're not going to live very long, and then they say something like, well, I have to survive for the next 8 months because my granddaughter's getting married, or my son's coming back from a tour in Iraq, or whatever. And I said, and how many times do they make it? And almost 100% of the time they make it. And I go, how? And I said, the answer is their emotional power carries them when their biologic power gives out. So I think of hope as an incredible gift, a kind of a medication, if you will, that amplifies our response to things. And no doctor anywhere has the right to take it away. You know, I've had doctors say, well, you know, I don't want them to have false hope. And as Andy Weil, is a friend of mine in integrative medicine, says, what's false hope? There is no such thing as false hope. Hope is the desire to prevail against overwhelming odds. There is no such thing as false hope. There's just hope. And so, you know, we have this, oh, you don't want to give them false hope. Yes, I want to give them hope. Not false hope, but hope. And for every situation I've encountered, there is hope. I've never seen a situation where you go, 100% of them die no matter what. You can absolutely take it to the bank and it'll happen within 4 weeks. And here you go. There's none of that. We're all very different. And I think we can do a great job with big statistics, looking at populations. We do a terrible job with an N of one. I can't tell you what's going to happen with an N of one. It's all over the place. It's, you know, it's like that pinball bouncing back and forth. You have no idea where it's going to land. So I think you have to be humble, and I think you also have to realize what a horrible thing it is to be in a place where there is no hope, and that's not something you ever want to do on purpose for a human being and another human being. You know, I just think of it as the magic. It's just one more tool in our arsenal to make people better. And there's a wonderful surgeon named Franny Moore, very famous surgeon back in Boston. And he once said to me, there is no more confounding factor in all of medicine than the patient's earnest desire to attend to a positive outcome, meaning patients want to get better and feel better and be cured. And it's confounding because we can't control that. We can't take it out of the equation. It's always there. And I think, thank God it is. It's what makes life bearable, because life is often having to make compromises with things that you can't necessarily fix. I can tell you, as you get older, you go, look, there's just so much wear and tear on the chassis, and I'm going to have to live with it. And so I think we all need hope. And it's one of the things I think that's missing when I talk to a lot of young people here at the university is they feel like we've taken it all. We've dashed the potential for resurrecting the earth, and we haven't. As George Carlin said, don't worry about the earth. She's going to shake us off like a bad case of fleas. She'll come through. We may not be on it, but she'll come through. We need to get set that we're going to fix this, and we're going to fix, we're going to fix that where things need to be done that are right. We have the power to do them. We have the power and the will to do them just because they're right, not because they bring us economic return or, some gain of our own, but because, Ukraine's a perfect example. I mean, Ukraine is a place we need to support completely, and we need to make sure that they're victorious. Why? Because it's very clear, the history of the world is very clear. When we let evil triumph, it goes amok, and it doesn't stop. It just keeps proliferating. But if it meets good, and it meets right, and it meets justice, it shrinks. It shrinks back. And, we've had this great peace since World War II that's only now disrupted by a despot, a tyrant. And the answer's always the same. You have to stand up to them and show that the herd will prevail over the wolf.
What do you think helps people to come up with the courage to stand up for what is right, especially in moments where they don't feel yet that the herd has their back? Because I understand, like, at some point you will march with a lot of people, but when you look throughout history, it always starts with one person. And then, like, they get companions along the way. But what would be your advice for people who want to stand up for what is right, whether it's for the global well-being or within their orbit, to have the courage to also deal with the consequences till the good has won?
I think first it helps to have good parents. I think it helps to have parents who embrace those values. It helps to have friends who embrace those values. I always am surprised, when I tell a story in this new book about Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis is an African-American musician. And one night he goes and he's playing in a club. And at the end of the night, this white man comes up and says, that's the best playing a piano I've ever seen. You play almost as well as Jerry Lee Lewis. And he goes, what do you mean? He says, your technique is almost as good. You've learned what Jerry Lee Lewis did on the piano. So he goes, no, you got it wrong. Jerry Lee Lewis learned how to play the piano from African-American musicians. The guy said, no, he invented it. He's the one who did it. And that's it. So Daryl Davis makes up his mind to get to know this guy, and they go out and have dinner together, and they talk about records, and he starts pulling records out of, and he starts playing some of the African American musicians, and this goes on for a while, and then one night, the white man, the guy that he's with, who's become his friend, says, "Hey, I got something for you," and he goes back and he says, "Just wait right here at the kitchen table," and he walks back in, and it's a Ku Klux Klan uniform outfit. And he says, "You can have this. I don't need it anymore." And Daryl Davis realized that was part of the issue, was getting intimate and trusting people and learning that you can't hate a friend. You can't. And so he set out on a quest. He now has 200 Ku Klux Klan robes that he's been given by people who finally relented and said, I don't want to be racist. I know you. I think so often we have to tell each other stories, because the stories are what help us believe. And when we believe, then we act. And I think so much of the time, as you say, you have to have that story of the Martin Luther King, or Nelson Mandela, or somebody who stands up and stands out, and then but those stories are meant to also inspire you that even little acts can make a difference. And I think we learn that again, when you start saying, well, what's the impact going to be 7 generations from now? You get a lot of courage, because you realize it's going to take a lot of courage to get that far, to reach out that far. So I think, we're at that stage now. I take a lot of heart that so many of the young people I meet at the university are obsessed with what are we going to do, and it's not like this is far removed. This is immediate for them. This is real. They talk about not having kids because they don't want to bring them up in the world. And so I look at that and I go, okay, they're they're serious about this. And we need to have your backs. We need to be able to say, yes, we're going to make these decisions for your benefit and for the benefit of 7 generations down the road. And if we do, we always will end up doing the right thing. It's not going to be the right thing to have Russia invade Ukraine and take Ukraine and then start bit by bit nibbling away at the flank of NATO for the rest of our lives. That's just going to be a disaster. And going to war in that situation is also going to be a disaster. So we have no choice but to handle this situation in Ukraine the way we have to, because it's the right thing to do, because Ukrainians have suffered, because they've been invaded, because they are right and Putin and the Russians are in the wrong. And we have to learn that sooner or later, the absolute most expedient thing is to do what's right, because you're either going to do it now or you do it later, but it'll be that much more costly. So I think you do get the courage, especially when you start trusting people and you realize they feel the way you do. Because every once in a while you go, oh, you feel the way I do? Oh, well, maybe we can do this together, And so often you discover that the people who are right next to you, when you share your heart with them, they absolutely share theirs with yours. And it's amazing. You can take the most conservative, human being on the planet. I guarantee you we'll find 80% of the things in the world that we can agree on. And my politics may be way to the left, theirs may be way to the right, but somehow as human beings, we will meet in the middle. Mm-hmm. We will meet in the middle. So I think that's what, I don't know if you've had this experience, but when I went to med school, I was convinced the only reason they let me in medical school was to have me flunk out. But it turned out that I was wrong. And it turned out that every time I had a hard problem in a class in medical school, everybody else had the same problem. And then I began to realize, oh, wait a minute, we're all pretty smart. We all have the same problem. You have to have faith that everybody else has the same problem that you have. And that all you're waiting for is, did you have a problem with that assignment last week? Yeah, I really blew it. So did I. Well, it turns out everybody in the class blew it. Thank God they grade on a curve. But I think so often when we let our hearts open to people, we are surprised by how much we have in common.
I love that you touched upon the topic of opening our hearts, because I think nowadays people often have the illusions others have their stuff together, they have no problems, things are going really well with them, whether it's their work, whether it's their relationship. I think especially social media creates that illusion often, and I think when people have the courage to take away the masks and the filters and open their heart, that's when real connection happen and real impact. And I saw that especially when it comes to the journey of grief. When you share, oh my God, I feel like I couldn't get out of bed. I was eating all day long. I didn't want to work. I felt it was never going to get any better. Any struggle that you are sharing, that's actually when change already is happening, because the other person then doesn't feel alone anymore and knows, okay, I'm not the only one that's struggling with that problem or that challenge.
Yeah, I think you're right. I didn't mean to cut you off. But I think sometimes first off, I think we mistake intimacy in this day and age with social media. That's not intimate at all. And it's giving us it's connectivity for the sake of connectivity. It's not connectivity for the sake of intimacy. Okay. I think you bring up a very good point, for example, with grief. And that is, we are all going to experience grief. We all have a commonality there of grief. We all can understand in our own heart, you don't get over grieving. You continue, and your life resumes, but you still have that hole in your heart where you're grieving for the rest of your life. And so this idea that you keep, people will stop saying, well, you need to get over it, or, you need to get out more, or, you need to buck up a little bit, or maybe they should give you some antidepressants. And you go, no, that's not, grief is a very different, I write about that in the book. Grief is not sadness. It's a completely different mindset. it oscillates. That's one of the things about grief is you go from having this poignant, terribly sad moment to remembering something wonderful that you did together and the joy that you experienced in that. And it brings a gigantic smile. You remember the time that he did that and everybody starts laughing. And so you're going through this oscillatory state, which is very much the opposite of depression. But I think, I think that depression is another problem where we don't really share how much depression there is and how much there is to go around. And I think we're getting better about mental health. I think we're starting to see the very beginnings of the acceptance of mental health. But I think it's still this idea of I have to find the herd that I can belong to, where grief is allowed, where depression is allowed, where weakness is allowed, where failure is allowed. And I think when you get to that point, you go, I'm accepted for who I am, and I'm not as bad as I thought. I'm not as sad as I thought. I'm not being prejudged. We're so afraid of being judged by other people, and we're by far the harshest judges that we have of all. We kill ourselves. You feel like the Russian judge 10.0, German judge 10.0, you 0.0. No matter what you did, it's not right. It's not perfect. I think that by reaching out to a herd of people who are grieving, who are going through substance abuse, with resistance, if you will. If you're talking about groups that are suffering in terms of political rights, of access to health care, of upward mobility, whatever it is, you go, each one of those groups has an identity that people can belong to. Now, you can have bad identities. 2 generations ago, a generation ago, if you were a white supremacist, you had a very hard time finding anybody else. Okay? Now you can join a global club of white supremacists and you all convince each other that you're correct and that there's constant conspiracies and all the rest of this. That's that's unfortunately the downward spiral of belonging to a group. That you can degenerate and convince yourself that since everybody is sharing my opinions, this must be right. And so I think that's one of the problems we have today is that people with extreme positions have been given voices that in the past we never would have even paid attention to, listened to. And now not only are we listening to them, but some of them are on our television screens. I think that we need to rally. We need to understand that most of us want what's right and what's good. And, Jesse Jackson at one point was asked about injustice in the world. And he said, I've traveled all over the world and I see plenty of places where injustice exists. But he said, I've never been in a place where it prevailed forever. He said, eventually injustice falls. And that's what you have to remember. And so I think you're right. If we can truly reach out to people, not just, don't get me wrong. I think social media is a very good way to connect, but there needs to be something beyond that. I mean, staying in your little pod and just, sending out communiques is not going to make it. That's not heart to heart, and it's not person to person. So you're absolutely right. When you find people that are in your herd, you become stronger.
With social media, I didn't mean that's our connection. I meant more social media often is the cause when we flip through profiles, even of people that we don't know, that we get the feeling and the illusion that their life is all perfect, and that sometimes diminishes or also makes the courage very small to actually share when we do have a problem. And I totally agree. The most important really is heart-to-heart connection and to practice that art and we are often surprised when we do come up with the courage what we get rewarded with.
Yeah, I think, I think there's some issues with social media, like the whole idea of influencers. You go, well, what's an influencer? An influencer is a person who basically, just by their presence, no matter what it is, tends to have more sway over other people because they have so many followers. And you go, well, is that leadership? I'm not sure. In many cases, it's not, but in many cases, it can be. It can be leadership. It can be truly, you should buy sustainable products, not, and so they can take a stand. I think you're right that very often we think we see perfection, I think we say, I can't possibly measure up against that. None of those people are perfect, I guarantee you. But I think that sometimes the media, we lop off. I'm sure Kim Kardashian gets out of bed in the morning and her hair's ruffled and she doesn't have any makeup and she looks like, looks terribly fatigued and tired, especially living the lifestyle she does. But, she's also somebody who went and got a law degree and is using that law degree in a truly meaningful, impactful way. And I go, why not have her as an influencer? I mean, I think she's got a lot to offer, and I think you have to look at the good side of it all and say it's not just cosmetics and fashion. It's far more than that. So you pick your influencers. You choose them. You don't have them. Nobody says you have to follow them. That you're the one who makes the choice. And I think sometimes we forget that we can choose not to stand up. We can choose not to be committed to what's right. And unfortunately, what happens is life doesn't turn out so well.
Allan, I'm very grateful that you are one of the people who stands up for what is right, that you are sharing both in your personal and your professional life what is right, and that you inspired us throughout this conversation on so many levels. And I'm sure our audience loves the episode and everything you said. And I will also put in the show notes all your books, because people need to continue and get all the goodness from you. And I'm very grateful for your time today.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for all your time and caring so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a wrap for today, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you liked the episode, please share it with your family and friends. And don't forget to tag us, and we see you next Wednesday.